Welcome back to the You Grow Girl podcast. I'm your host, Stacey C, and I welcome you to episode 5. But before we get into episode 5, I just want to take a few minutes to ask you if you are practicing self care. That was the last episode, and I hope that you are taking that time to practice your self care. But I just cannot believe it is already the end of April and about to be in May. And I had a wonderful, wonderful April. Some things that I did is I celebrated Easter in my own way. And I also had some time to relax and rejuvenate for spring break. And I was able to go to New York and I had some good food and got to enjoy my time. And I hope that you all took some time this April to get some self care and, get some rest for you. But that leads me into the cliche that we always hear: April showers bring May flowers. And with that, sometimes we can have showers in our life, in our everyday life. And what I mean by that, that brings us to our next topic, which is grief. Now, this topic for this episode is one that affects countless numbers of people in various different ways. I know impacted me, and people that I know that are very close to me. Now, it can affect people in ways of losing your family members, regardless if that's parents, your siblings, a child, a husband, a wife, your friends, losing your partner, grief from your marriage. You may have transitioned into a divorce. You can have grief from losing a job or your career, grief from not accomplishing your goals or your dreams, grief from getting an unfortunate news for your health. And maybe you also could experience grief from fertility, experiencing a miscarriage. Now, with grief, for this episode, I do not have anybody here. As you can hear, it's just me on this episode. I do want to say that I did have a few people that I wanted to ask about talking about grief, but I was unsure initially what topic I wanted to talk about for April. And I asked someone that's very near and dear to me, and that person declined being on the show, which, I am not upset about because not everyone's ready to share their story, especially with dealing with grief. And I wanted to ask someone else, but at the time, I didn't feel that that was fair because I did not have a map for this episode written down and I didn't have notes yet. So I did not want to invite someone that I just had a bunch of ideas in my mind, but I didn't have them down on my iPad because that's what I use for my notes. I didn't want to invite them and I wasn't sure because I asked the first person if that second person wanted to share their grief story either. But the first thing I want to say about grief is that there is no wrong or right way to grieve. Your grieving story, your way that you grieve is the way that you need to process your loss. There also is no timeline for grief. So I want you to know that grief comes in waves, it comes in stages. You may experience various stages of grief for a certain amount of time. Maybe certain stages you may be able to transition through at a shorter time, and some it may take a little bit longer. Again, like I said, I didn't want to ask anyone else to be on the show to talk about grief because, I also did not want to cause unnecessary trauma to someone to have to relive a traumatic experience for them. So, going into grief, what I learned through my own grief story, and I will share that later, there are 5 stages of grief. And these stages come back, and there's no specific order in which you go through grief or these stages. They almost like circle back, kind of like you may go through one stage and then you go through another and then you go through another and then you may go back to that same stage. But in each stage that I have found, and I'm not an expert by any means, I'm just speaking from my experience, but what I have found is that in each stage, how you transition through that stage or go through it, it's a little bit different. The 5 stages of grief, just to give some background, was developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. It became famous after she published her book in 1967, if I from my research. And I want to talk about the different stages of grief. The first stage is called, not the first stage, I'm sorry. I just want to go through each of the stages. One of the stages is called denial. And in that stage, you may feel numb. You may feel the person that you have lost their presence around you. And you may also carry on in your life as if nothing has happened to you. Another stage is anger. You may feel anger towards that person that you lost. You may want to ask yourself, like, why did you leave me? If someone was sick, why didn't you take your medicine? Why didn't you get the diagnosis earlier? So you may feel those feelings of anger. You also may feel anger at yourself for things that you did or did not do while the person was alive. Maybe you didn't spend enough time with them. Maybe you did not help them in ways that you should or could have. There may be a lot of different questions of why you may feel anger at yourself for things that you may or may not did while that person was alive. Another stage is bargaining. You make deals with yourself or with God. You can ask a lot of what if questions, like what if I did this? What if I did that? You can also go and wishing that you could go back and change some things and hope that you may have a different outcome in the bargaining stage. There's also depression, and depression can come in waves over many months or years. It can feel like you could feel like your life is no longer holds any meaning. Another stage is acceptance. That is when you finally start to live again and then you have accepted what has happened, the loss that you experience. Now, I want to get into how grief can affect you physically and mentally. So, how grief affects you physically and mentally. So, physically, it can affect your whole entire body. It can affect all of your organ systems. You can experience fatigue, nausea, heart palpitations, weak muscles, or joint pain, and so many other symptoms as well. You can also have feelings of apathy, feelings of anger. You can feel sadness and regret. There can be guilt of feeling grateful that you no longer have to provide like around the clock care for your dying relative. There could be sadness that your loved one is gone, but relief that they're at peace. So, how does grief affect? So, grief can affect children and adults in various different ways. Some signs that we have that you may see with a child, it could depend on the child being able to express their feelings more. So, their age, there can be various stages of grief for children. You may see like things like developmental regression, like you may see in a child that is experiencing grief, like the loss of a parent or a loved one. They may start bedwetting or speaking like a baby. You may see that a child have sleeping problems. So maybe they might want to sleep with their parents. They may have experienced nightmares or different dreams or dreaming about that person. A child may exhibit anger and behavior reactions. Sometimes there are children that I know, not personally, I wouldn't say, but that I know that have experienced loss and are acting out in school or talking back at home. And I do know some children who have experienced some of the other symptoms I talked about as well. Depending on, like I said, for the child's age, they may withdraw from their friends. They may refuse to want to go to school. Some physical complaints that student kids may have could be a stomach ache or headaches. With adults, you see a lot of, they may experience the different stages of grief. With adults, you could see depression in adults, such as not being able to get out of bed, not being able to function in everyday life. And you may also notice that adults experience some numbness, which is usually associated with the denial stage. Now, with grief, I have learned is that a lot of times people may not know what to say to you when you are grieving. And sometimes they end up saying things that are hurtful to you, but it's not really intentional. And what I have learned is, especially with talking with my therapist, is that when people say things when you're grieving, for instance, they're saying things because maybe it's really difficult for them to see someone that they love and care about struggling, that they're grieving. So they say things to you that may not be, like I said, intentional. And what I mean by that is, for instance, you could experience a family member's death, and you may still have that family member's clothing. And sometimes people will say something like, "Hey, don't you think maybe," and it could be like a year or 2 years, 5 years, and someone may say to you, "Don't you think you should pack up their things?" And maybe for you, you might not be ready for that. They may feel like, well, giving that suggestion because it could be painful for you to constantly see your loved one's clothing. And again, it may not be intentional to hurt you, but they may say those things, because they're worried about you. Or they'll say to you that you need to celebrate holidays like how you used to. And that may not be something that you want to do. For instance, they may say that, hey, why don't you during Christmas, put up a Christmas tree, and that might not be something that you want to do or that you're ready for. And to someone, that is telling you these things, the friends or family, they could be saying those things because they think that it'll help you in your grief. But in actuality, that could be hurtful for you because it may just remind you that, especially if you lost someone, that you no longer have that person in your life anymore. So now I'm going to get into my grief story. So I have lost both my parents. And earlier I spoke about how grief affects you depending on the relationship of that person. So I'm going to start with my mother, and then I'm going to talk about my father. I'm not going to give a lot of details as to things leading up to their death. I'm just going to give you some background on, how they passed away and what caused their death, and then how I dealt with it. I'm not going to talk about my siblings and how they grieve because that's their own story to tell. Now, before I start my grief story, I just want to say that I was given the best, I don't know if you would call it advice, and I'm putting my fingers up as quotes, when I lost my mother. And at the time, a friend at that particular moment in my life told me, because they had experienced grief themselves from losing a sibling and their father. But that person told me that you have to feel all of the emotions. So if you feel anger, you're allowed to feel that. If you feel um any of the various stages. They didn't say the stages, but they just told me to feel all of the emotions. I had to do that. And it was like someone telling me or helping to tell me that I can have permission to feel however I needed to feel. If I wanted to feel sad, if I wanted to feel happy, if I wanted to feel anger, I had that permission to do that. And I didn't know it at the time, but I needed it. Now, my mother passed away in 2018 from pancreatic cancer. She lived a year from diagnosis to her death. When my mom passed away, now anybody who knows me knows that my mom was I wouldn't say my everything, but she was a confidant to me. I wouldn't even call her a friend. She wasn't my friend. Like I wasn't going to, at that time in my life, I wasn't saved. So I wasn't going to hang out with her at the club or anything like that because that wasn't my mom's lifestyle either because she was saved at the time and had been for many years. But she was my friend. Um, she was my confidant. She was a prayer warrior for me. She interceded in prayer for me. And I'm so grateful for that. She was a great, amazing mom to me and a phenomenal grandmother. She loved her grandchildren. She loved her siblings. She loved her parents. She was respectful to her siblings and parents. She was a peacemaker. So just giving you a little bit about my mother, and don't get me wrong, she's the first person to tell you she is not perfect. She was not perfect, but like I like to tell people, she was not perfect, but she was perfect for me and my brothers. So when my mom passed away, the day that she passed away, my mom was the second person that I've ever seen in my entire life die in front of me. And when she passed away, I remember a relative telling me, "Stacey, your mom's gone." And I just screamed and I could not stop screaming. And then I remember because we were at my grandmother's house and family was there. And I remember my brother like lifting me up off the ground and just feeling like my heart was broken. So after my mom passed, she passed in September of 2018. To experience loss, is very, very difficult. And the time after that, I didn't realize the changes that I would go through. So some initial changes that I experienced after my mom passed away was a holiday. And that holiday was actually, it was my birthday. So I experienced my birthday, and I'm not going to say why, but I actually had to bury my mother the day before my 40th birthday. So that was something I had to process, that I'm burying my mother the day before I turned 40. And that was very difficult for me. I experienced anger at that point. Not anger at her, but anger for the circumstances. And then the first holiday, because people always say the first holiday, the first birthday is usually hard after you lose someone, especially someone that you love dearly and that you're very close to, was Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving was an holiday that in my family we love to celebrate. It was all about family and food. And excuse me, that was the first time that I did not cook for Thanksgiving, and it was the first time that I've started to learn that I didn't have to cook. I didn't have to cook in order to celebrate a holiday, and to be honest, it felt wrong to cook Thanksgiving and she's not here. It felt wrong to celebrate Thanksgiving and she's not here. So, shortly after that, Christmas came. That was the first year I did not put up a tree. Now, if you know me, you know that I love some Christmas, okay? I love Christmas. I mean, I'm the type of person that I will put my tree up the end of October, the beginning of November. And I would try to keep it up as long as I can until back then my mama or my daughter would tell me it's time to take this tree down, or they would take it down for me. So I love Christmas. And I had no desire to put up a Christmas tree. And then her birthday came. And my mom didn't really like to celebrate her birthday, but after she got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, her birthday started to become more important to her. So for her birthday, I did go down to her grave. That was something that helped me in my grief. Now, when I first lost my mom, I can say that I experienced denial. I was numb. I could feel like her presence was nearby. A lot of times I would dream about her. My mom used to come to my home every morning before she would go to work. And she would come sometimes after work because, like I said, I enjoyed my mother. I enjoyed spending time with her. So after she passed away, I would wake up sometimes and think that she was coming through the door because she had a key to my home. And I would think that she's coming through the door. And I remember the first time that happened to me, I woke up and was like, Mom. And I also experienced anger. I was angry, not with my mom, actually. I was angry with God. And I know some people would say that, definitely that's wrong. And, I have since gave my life to the Lord and me and God have worked that out. But I was angry. I was angry because I felt like my mom does so much good to people. She's nice to people. She tries to do the right thing. And I just didn't understand why he took her. And then I started to experience different stages, such as depression, because I just didn't want to do anything. And so the depression and the denial kind of went hand in hand because I was very numb to things and I didn't want to go on. I didn't want to, like, I don't want anybody to think, like, oh my goodness, did she want to kill herself? No, that's not at all what I'm saying. I just didn't want to live life without my mom. And then one of the things that really was difficult for me was as I started to, life started to continue on, because that's what happens. Life continues on even though you're experiencing this grief. But one of the things that really was really hurtful during this grief was that I bought a new cell phone. And in the cell phone that I had before I bought a new one during that time, I had a voicemail of my mother. And I think I had had it for a year after she passed. So I go and get the new phone and I'm thinking that everything that's on the phone, gets transferred to your new device. Well, voicemails do not get transferred to from device to device, okay? And I'm sharing this because if you have a video or if you have a voicemail of your loved one that has passed away, you may want to save it and send it to like your email or save it to some type of drive because when I transferred that phone, I lost the voicemail. And that was so hurtful to me because it was almost like losing her again because it was a voicemail that I couldn't recover and it was for me to be able to still hear her voice. Now, through this grief, I had to learn and it was difficult for me through this grief to change how I celebrated things and how I celebrated holidays. So, another important holiday for us was Easter. We love Easter. Being Christians, we believe that it is the resurrection of Jesus. And we also had, family and food as well, but that's the reason why my family celebrates. Easter was, like I said, a holiday that we loved and we celebrated. So that became different. So as I started to learn that in my grief, I don't have to celebrate in the same ways that I did before, it became hard for me to accept that. So, and then I started to think about what was really important about the holiday. Yes, it was important for having my loved one here, but it made me really reflect what was important. Like the tree no longer really was important for Christmas. It was for me, I celebrate Christmas for a recognition of celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. And that tree was no longer important. Presents weren't important to me anymore. So what was important was the things that, like, for me, that my mom had, that she fed into us, celebrating, like I said, for Christmas, that is the recognition of the birth of Jesus, celebrating Easter because knowing that it is Jesus' resurrection, celebrating the new year because it's a new year. But, like I said, it was difficult to have these things, and my mom wasn't here anymore. Now, one of the things that did help me in my grief was I've always had a relationship with God, even though I haven't been saved very long, but I've always had a relationship with him. I've always talked to him. I've always prayed. And during that time, I was reading my Bible a lot. And one of the scriptures that really resonated to me was Psalm 34:18. And it says in the NIV that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And that scripture really stuck to me because I was like, I knew that God understood my brokenheartedness. God lost a child himself. His son was also, he understands what it's like to lose something, to lose someone that you love. And also during that time, though, I got saved and I got baptized. And because of that, I had to do that for me. Because for me, God told me that I was going to be healed because, like I said, I felt like my heart had been broken into pieces, and God said, "You will be healed, but you'll be different." So that gets into the next thing, having to accept that I was different. And to be quite honest, as I was driving here from work and thinking about this recording, I came to the realization that I grieved the old me as well, that I had to grieve that I was no longer the Stacey that I used to be. And what I mean by that is before I would love to have holidays with family and fellowship with family and have lots of foods and different things. Well, I no longer wanted to do that anymore. And I also had to accept what that looked like, the new me. And I can say that this has been a time of growth, and at times I can say that even I didn't like it. I was like, I don't understand why I'm like this now." Like now I can say, like, I'm a lot more sensitive than what I used to be. Like I cry at the drop of a hat. And I used to not be that way. I don't like to go anywhere. Before I would like, oh, I would like to go here and go there. I really don't like to go anywhere. I'm a homebody. I'd rather just stay on my couch and watch my little TV and things. So, when you lose somebody, you also experience that grief for that person. But then you also have to experience grief of the old you. And sometimes, you do say, I really wish that, I used to do this or I used to like that. And that is hard to accept as well. Now, 4 years later, after I lost my mom, I lost my father to liver failure. Now, I can say this again, grief is different with the person that you lose, especially when that's the grief that you're experiencing is the loss of a person. My relationship with my father, though I'm not going to get into any details because that is personal, that was a different relationship. We were not as close as I was with my mother, though my father was in my life. It wasn't, and my parents were married, but that relationship was definitely different. Now, I'm not going to say it didn't hurt to lose my father. It did. I don't wish death on anybody. It did hurt, but the hurt was different. The grief was different. Now, the grief is different definitely now because it's a whole different feeling when you don't have any parents. So, I remember when we lost our father, my siblings and I, my brothers. And at the funeral, I remember my youngest brother saying to me that we were going to close the casket. And I'm telling you that if anybody's ever experienced that, that is a very difficult thing to do. I couldn't even look to do it. I had to turn my face as we closed the casket on my father. And it was like a realization that I don't have parents now. I don't have a mother or father. And that was a surreal, surreal feeling. So I think that in that stage, I think that I was in not really denial, but I guess so denial because I was kind of numb. But like I said, it was a surreal feeling of not really having parents. It was almost like, the people who brought me into this world no longer exist. And like I just, I can't explain it. Like all I can say is that it was surreal and it has been a different experience in my life. But since then, it has been 2 years since I lost my father. Again, the grief has been different. Different, much, much different than losing my mother. And I think maybe because of the loss of my mother, grief that the way that I grieved my father, you know, it wasn't much like changes in a sense because I already know what it's like to have lost somebody. So to lose him too, the way that I went about my life or being a different person, I'd already started to experience that. But I can say with that as well, I am a different person even more so now because now I'm a person who, doesn't have parents and things. And it's not funny as in like, laughter, but when I say that people never know what to say. Like they may say something about, your parents or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I don't have parents. Both my parents passed away. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. Or, they always have the shocked look, especially because at the age I am. I guess they wouldn't think that, I've lost both of my parents. Now, I would say, in your grief, you can get help for your grief if you're struggling. For me, the help that I got was from the church because I needed the spiritual assistance. And then I also went to grief counseling. So for the church, there is spiritual counseling available? Maybe you have a pastor or they have ministers in your church that actually specialize in grief. I would suggest, if you're really struggling with grief and especially with the depression, I would suggest that you definitely go and seek assistance from your church. You can also think about joining a church, such as, I did of getting saved and baptized. You can also go to family counseling. It's nothing wrong with going to therapy and getting that extra help. I actually have a T-shirt that says I got God in a therapist. And you also can get individual counseling, so you can also go with your family if the grief affects you, you and your family, you can go with your family and also have individual counseling. And also there are various supports for grief. You can go join like different groups. There are support groups online. You may find some support groups that are for a specific reason, such as I know when my mom passed away, one of the things that helped me with my grief was joining the pancreatic cancer research. It's called PanCan, and they actually have one here in Delaware. And at the time when my mom passed away, they did a celebration of your loved one's life. So it was a way we would meet at a location, and we actually the Capitol here where I live in Delaware. They actually had the Capitol building light up purple because purple is the color for pancreatic cancer, and were able to have glow sticks that were purple, and we were able to write our loved one's name down, either someone who passed away from pancreatic cancer or someone who actually survived it. And then I was able to meet some survivors of pancreatic cancer. They actually have a fundraiser that they do. I believe it's coming up soon. So you can join other ones that may, it may be for cancer, it may be for various other organizations and specific ones. It could be some for gender. Maybe you may join a female group. It might be some just for males. It could be some for children. Or you may join an organization that is specific for parents. Especially with losing a child. No one um no one can prepare you for that, losing having the death of your child. So maybe through your grief and your experience, you may be able to join a support group specifically with other parents who have lost their children. You can also do telehealth therapy. You can also find different ways to project your grief. I know that some people have gotten involved in certain organizations, like working for them and helping to bring awareness to certain diseases and illnesses out there. Or maybe you could start a nonprofit so you can help others. I was told of a nonprofit from a parent who lost their child, so she started a nonprofit to be able to help other families who may be going through difficult times. And I believe I can't think of the name of the nonprofit, but I believe that she named it after her child that she lost. You can find different ways to, like I said, to project your griefs and to help you while you are grieving. Now, there are different websites out there that you can find online to help you with grief. Some websites that I found were grief.com, Grief Share, the Dowdy Center, just to name a few. And I believe the Dowdy Center, and I looked on their website, they work with kids as well as families. And I saw that they had some information on there, especially with dealing with kids or helping kids who have been affected by school shootings, for instance. Now, I want to say this before I end my show that if you need help, please get some. It is nothing wrong with getting help as you grieve. And I want you to also to remember that you can feel all the emotions that you need to feel, and you need to give yourself permission to feel all the emotions as you're grieving. And remember, as I stated in the beginning of the show, there is no right or wrong way to grieve, and there's no timeline. I just want to thank you all for listening to my show. This was actually a difficult topic for me. I think that's why I waited so long to record this episode. I didn't know how it would affect me. But I just want to thank you all for listening to my podcast. And I am your host, Stacey C. And I want you to please don't forget to follow and subscribe to You Go Girl. And you can follow me on various social media platforms, and they will be listed below. So, again, I thank you for episode 5 of You Go Girl podcast. Thank you.